The morning mist clung to the mountains of eastern Oregon as Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her scope for what would become the most consequential shot in modern military history. 3 miles below her concealed position, 800 American soldiers were trapped in a valley that had become their tomb, surrounded by enemy forces that had turned a routine patrol into a systematic massacre. For 6 years, Sarah had been told that her place was behind a desk, analyzing intelligence reports while men fought the battle she was trained to win. But as she watched through her scope, calculating wind speed, bullet drop, and the impossible distance to a target that could save or doom an entire battalion, Sarah knew that some rules were meant to be broken when lives hung in the balance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's journey to that mountainside began 23 years earlier in the small farming town of Millbrook, Nebraska, where her father owned 2,000 acres of corn and wheat that stretched to the horizon. Thomas Mitchell was a Vietnam veteran who had learned to shoot out of necessity and taught his daughter the same skills out of love. Every Saturday morning, beginning when Sarah was 8 years old, father and daughter would walk to the makeshift shooting range Thomas had built behind their barn, where weathered targets hung from posts at distances that gradually increased as Sarah's abilities grew. Thomas never treated his daughter differently because she was female. When Sarah struggled to handle the recoil of his old Remington 700, he didn't switch to a smaller caliber rifle. Instead, he taught her proper breathing techniques, showed her how to position her body to absorb the impact, and explained the physics of projectile motion with the patience of someone who understood. That mastery came from understanding, not just repetition. By the time Sarah turned 12, she could consistently hit targets at 400 yards, a distance that impressed even the local hunting guides who had been shooting for decades. But Sarah's real talent emerged during her freshman year at Millbrook High School when the JROTC instructor, Master Sergeant Robert Kane, noticed her exceptional hand-eye coordination during a basic marksmanship demonstration. Kane was a former Army Ranger who had served 3 tours in Somalia and possessed the kind of tactical knowledge that couldn't be learned from textbooks. He recognized something in Sarah's approach to shooting that separated her from students who simply followed instructions. She didn't just aim at targets. She studied them, calculating environmental factors and making adjustments that demonstrated an intuitive understanding of ballistics that Kane had seen in only a handful of soldiers. During his 20-year career, under Kane's mentorship, Sarah's abilities evolved from impressive to extraordinary. She learned to read wind patterns by observing grass movement at multiple distances, to calculate temperature effects on bullet trajectory, and to account for the Coriolis effect on extremely long-range shots. More importantly, Kane taught her the mental discipline that separated competent marksmen from exceptional snipers, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to control breathing and heart rate during moments of extreme stress, and to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. By her senior year, Sarah held every shooting record in Nebraska's high school JROTC program. She could consistently hit targets at 800 yards using iron sights, and her scores on standardized marksmanship tests exceeded those of many active-duty military personnel. College recruiters from across the country offered scholarships for competitive shooting, but Sarah had already decided on a different path. She wanted to serve her country, and she wanted to do it in a role where her exceptional abilities could make a real difference in protecting American lives. The Army recruiter in Lincoln, Nebraska, Staff Sergeant Maria Valdez, had seen many talented young people choose military service, but Sarah's test scores and demonstrated abilities were unlike anything in her 15 years of recruiting experience. Sarah scored 98 out of 100 on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, with perfect scores in mathematics, mechanical comprehension, and electronics information. Her physical fitness scores placed her in the top 2% of all recruits, male or female, and her psychological evaluations indicated the kind of mental resilience and decision-making ability that the military valued in its most challenging assignments. But when Sarah expressed interest in combat roles, specifically sniper training and special operations, Valdez's enthusiasm became cautious. Military policy officially allowed women in combat positions, but institutional attitudes often lagged behind policy changes. Valdez explained that while Sarah's qualifications were exceptional, she would likely face significant challenges in pursuing the kind of assignments that matched her abilities. The suggestion was that Sarah consider military intelligence, communications, or logistics fields where her talents would be valued without challenging traditional assumptions about women's roles in combat. Sarah's response was diplomatic but firm. She appreciated the guidance, but she had not spent 4 years developing world-class marksmanship skills to analyze intelligence reports from a climate-controlled office. She wanted to serve in positions where her abilities could directly contribute to mission success and the protection of American forces. If that meant facing institutional resistance, she was prepared for the challenge. Basic training at Fort Moore, Georgia, confirmed both Sarah's exceptional abilities and the institutional barriers she would face throughout her military career. Her drill sergeant, Sergeant First Class Anthony Rodriguez, was a decorated infantry veteran who had commanded respect through fairness and competence during 12 years of service. Rodriguez recognized Sarah's potential immediately, but he also understood the reality of military culture in ways that Sarah was only beginning to discover. During the 3rd week of basic training, Sarah scored the highest marksmanship qualification in her company's history, outperforming recruits who had been hunting and shooting for years before enlisting. Her scores were so exceptional that Rodriguez had her retake the test twice to ensure accuracy, both times producing identical results that exceeded expert qualification standards by margins that impressed even veteran instructors. More significantly, Sarah demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking and situational awareness that marked her as natural leadership material. But Sarah's success also generated resentment from some male recruits, who viewed her achievements as challenges to their assumptions about military hierarchy and gender roles. During a field exercise in the 6th week of training, Private Danny Hoffman, a former high school football player from Texas, made comments about women taking positions away from men who had earned them through superior physical strength and traditional military service. The comments were loud enough for other recruits to hear, and subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation with Rodriguez's authority. Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of maturity and professionalism that would define her entire military career. Rather than engaging in arguments that would have distracted from training objectives, she focused on exceeding every standard and helping her fellow recruits succeed in areas where they struggled. When Hoffman had difficulty with land navigation, Sarah spent her free time teaching him compass and map reading techniques. When other recruits struggled with equipment maintenance, Sarah organized study groups that ensured everyone met inspection standards. Rodriguez observed these interactions with the kind of attention that experienced leaders brought to evaluating potential in their subordinates. Sarah's technical skills were obviously exceptional, but her character and leadership ability were equally impressive. She possessed the rare combination of individual excellence and team-first mentality that the military valued in its most challenging assignments. Rodriguez began recommending Sarah for advanced training opportunities that would position her for the kind of specialized roles where her abilities could make the greatest impact. The advanced individual training at Fort Benning, Georgia, provided Sarah with her first real exposure to the institutional barriers that would define much of her early military career. The Military Occupational Specialty School for Infantry and Related Combat Arms was dominated by instructors and students who had traditional views about women's roles in military service. While policy officially allowed women in all military positions, cultural attitudes often reflected decades of tradition that viewed combat roles as exclusively male domains. Sarah's first instructor, Master Sergeant William Crawford, was a 25-year veteran who had served in every major conflict since the Gulf War and possessed the kind of institutional knowledge that made him invaluable for training purposes. Crawford was professional and fair in his treatment of all students, but Sarah could sense his skepticism about women's ability to perform in the physically and mentally demanding roles that combat arms required. This skepticism wasn't malicious or deliberately discriminatory, but it reflected genuine concerns about unit cohesion, physical standards, and the practical challenges of integrating women into combat roles that had been exclusively male for generations. Sarah's approach to these challenges was characteristically direct and professional. Rather than demanding recognition or special consideration, she focused on exceeding every standard and demonstrating through performance that her gender was irrelevant to her ability to contribute to mission success. During a particularly challenging field exercise that tested students' ability to operate effectively under stress, Sarah's performance was so exceptional that Crawford used her techniques as examples for other students to emulate. The exercise involved a simulated hostage rescue scenario where students had to navigate through a complex urban environment, identify targets at various ranges, and engage threats while avoiding civilian casualties. Sarah's approach combined technical precision with tactical innovation that impressed even the most experienced instructors. She identified sniper positions that other students had missed, calculated engagement angles that maximized effectiveness while minimizing exposure, and demonstrated the kind of spatial reasoning and mathematical ability that marked her as exceptional even among highly qualified peers. But Sarah's technical excellence was matched by leadership qualities that were equally impressive. During a night navigation exercise where several students became disoriented in unfamiliar terrain, Sarah organized search efforts that located missing team members while maintaining operational security and communication protocols. Her calm demeanor under pressure and ability to make sound decisions in stressful situations earned the respect of classmates who had initially been skeptical about women's place in combat roles. Crawford's evaluation of Sarah's performance reflected his professional assessment of her abilities and potential. Sarah Mitchell demonstrates exceptional technical proficiency, outstanding leadership potential, and the kind of mental toughness that the Army values in its most demanding assignments. Her marksmanship scores exceed those of 95% of infantry soldiers, and her tactical understanding suggests natural aptitude for specialized roles. I recommend her for advanced sniper training and consideration for special operations assignments. The recommendation represented a significant endorsement from an instructor whose opinions carried weight throughout the military training establishment. But Crawford also included a cautionary note that reflected his understanding of institutional realities. Candidate Mitchell should be prepared for challenges that result from traditional attitudes about women in combat roles. Her success will depend as much on her ability to navigate cultural barriers as on her technical and tactical abilities. Sarah graduated from advanced individual training ranked first in her class, with scores that established new records in several categories. Her marksmanship qualification exceeded expert standards by margins that required verification from multiple instructors, and her performance in tactical exercises demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that the military valued in its most challenging assignments. But as she prepared for her first duty assignment, Sarah understood that her real test would come not in controlled training environments, but in operational units where institutional attitudes about women's roles would determine whether her exceptional abilities would be utilized effectively or wasted in assignments that failed to match her potential. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The assignment letter that arrived during her final week at Fort Benning confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the challenges she would face. Despite her exceptional qualifications and Crawford's strong recommendation for sniper training, Sarah was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division's Intelligence Section at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The position involved analyzing satellite imagery and preparing briefings for operational commanders, important work that utilized some of her analytical skills but completely ignored her exceptional marksmanship abilities and tactical knowledge. Assignment was technically appropriate for someone with Sarah's qualifications and security clearance, but it represented exactly the kind of underutilization that she had hoped to avoid. Her commanding officer's letter explaining the assignment made the reasoning clear without being explicitly discriminatory. The intelligence section needed personnel with strong analytical skills and attention to detail, qualities that Sarah had demonstrated throughout her training. The letter made no mention of her marksmanship scores, tactical innovations, or recommendations for specialized training. Sarah accepted the assignment with the professionalism that had characterized her entire military career, but she also began planning how to position herself for opportunities that would better utilize her abilities. Military careers were often shaped as much by networking and strategic thinking as by technical competence, and Sarah understood that success would require patience, persistence, and the kind of political awareness that wasn't taught in military training programs. Her first day at Fort Bragg introduced Sarah to Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the intelligence officer who would supervise her work and significantly influence her early military career. Hayes was a West Point graduate with 15 years of experience in military intelligence and a reputation for excellence that had earned her command of one of the Army's most important intelligence units. She was also one of the few senior female officers that Sarah had encountered, and Sarah hoped that Hayes might serve as a mentor who understood the unique challenges that women faced in military service. But Hayes's approach to leadership was shaped by her own experiences navigating institutional barriers, and her perspective on women's roles in the military was more complex than Sarah had anticipated. Hayes believed that women's success in the military depended on excelling in roles where their contributions were unquestionable and avoiding positions where their presence might be seen as disruptive to unit cohesion. Her advice to Sarah was clear: focus on becoming the best intelligence analyst possible, build a reputation for excellence in areas where gender was irrelevant, and avoid pursuing assignments that might generate controversy or resistance from traditional military leaders. Sarah's response was respectful but indicated a fundamental disagreement with Hayes's philosophy. While she appreciated the guidance and understood the practical considerations behind it, Sarah believed that avoiding challenging assignments would ultimately limit her ability to serve her country effectively. Her goal was not simply to succeed within existing limitations, but to demonstrate that those limitations were unnecessary and counterproductive. Sarah's first 18 months at Fort Bragg became a masterclass in institutional frustration disguised as professional development. The 82nd Airborne Division's Intelligence Section operated from a secure facility that buzzed with activity around the clock, analyzing threats from around the globe and providing operational commanders with the information they needed to plan missions that could affect international stability. The work was genuinely important, intellectually challenging, and completely removed from the kind of direct action that Sarah's training had prepared her to excel in. Her daily routine involved analyzing satellite imagery from conflict zones across 3 continents, identifying potential threats to American forces, and preparing detailed briefings that senior officers used to make strategic decisions. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for pattern recognition and threat assessment that made her exceptionally effective at this work. She could spot camouflaged positions that other analysts missed, identify equipment signatures that revealed enemy capabilities, and synthesize complex information into clear, actionable intelligence that commanders valued. But excellence in intelligence analysis felt like a consolation prize for someone whose marksmanship scores suggested she could eliminate the threats she was identifying from distances that most soldiers couldn't even see. Sarah found herself studying satellite images of sniper positions, while knowing she could neutralize those same positions more effectively than the indirect fire missions that her intelligence reports typically recommended. The disconnect between her abilities and her assignments became more frustrating with each briefing. She prepared about threats that others would be sent to eliminate. The intelligence section was supervised by Major Kevin Thompson, a former infantry officer who had transitioned to intelligence work after a roadside bomb in Iraq damaged his left leg enough to end his field career. Thompson was competent, fair, and genuinely appreciative of Sarah's analytical abilities, but he also possessed the infantry officer's practical understanding that intelligence work and combat operations required fundamentally different skill sets. When Sarah expressed interest in field assignments that would utilize her marksmanship training, Thompson's response was diplomatically discouraging. Thompson explained that intelligence personnel were too valuable to risk in direct combat operations, and that Sarah's analytical abilities made her more useful to the Army in her current role than she would be as another rifle in an infantry unit. The explanation was logical from an organizational perspective, but it ignored the reality that Sarah's marksmanship abilities were exceptional, enough to provide capabilities that standard infantry training couldn't replicate. Thompson's suggestion that Sarah consider officer candidate school and a career path through military intelligence reflected his genuine desire to help her advance, but it also represented exactly the kind of career channeling that Sarah had hoped to avoid. Sarah's response was characteristically professional and persistent. She appreciated Thompson's guidance and understood the value of intelligence work, but she requested opportunities to participate in field exercises where her tactical skills could be evaluated alongside her analytical abilities. If the Army was going to make decisions about her career path, those decisions should be based on a complete assessment of her capabilities rather than assumptions about appropriate roles for female personnel. Thompson's compromise solution revealed both his leadership qualities and his understanding of institutional realities. He arranged for Sarah to participate in joint training exercises as an intelligence liaison, positions that would expose her to field operations while maintaining her primary assignment in the intelligence section. The arrangement satisfied organizational requirements while providing Sarah with opportunities to demonstrate her tactical abilities in realistic training scenarios. The first joint exercise took place at the Pineland Training Area in North Carolina's Owari National Forest, where Special Forces units conducted advanced training in unconventional warfare tactics. Sarah's official role was intelligence support, providing situational awareness and threat assessment for units conducting simulated operations against opposing forces. But the exercise's commanding officer, Colonel James Morrison, was a pragmatic leader who valued performance over protocol and recognized that Sarah's marksmanship abilities might provide training benefits that transcended her official assignment. Morrison was a former Ranger who had commanded special operations units in Afghanistan and Iraq before taking over the training command that prepared soldiers for the most challenging assignments the Army offered. He possessed the kind of tactical knowledge that came from personal experience in environments where small unit leadership and individual expertise could determine mission success or failure. More importantly, Morrison evaluated personnel based on their contributions to mission accomplishment rather than adherence to traditional role assignments. During the exercise's planning phase, Morrison observed Sarah's approach to terrain analysis and target identification, noting that her recommendations demonstrated an understanding of tactical considerations that most intelligence analysts never developed. When Sarah identified sniper positions that could support friendly operations or threaten opposing forces, her assessments included practical considerations about fields of fire, concealment, and egress routes that reflected genuine understanding of sniper tactics rather than theoretical knowledge from manuals. Morrison's decision to test Sarah's practical abilities came during the third day of the exercise, when opposing forces had established a position that dominated a key terrain feature. The friendly forces needed to control. Standard tactical doctrine called for either indirect fire to suppress the position or a flanking maneuver that would require additional time and personnel. But Morrison recognized an opportunity to evaluate Sarah's capabilities in a realistic scenario that wouldn't compromise her official assignment. The request was framed as an intelligence assessment rather than a combat assignment. Morrison asked Sarah to conduct detailed reconnaissance of the opposing position, identifying specific threats and recommending courses of action for friendly forces to neutralize them. The assignment required Sarah to move within 400 meters of the opposing position, well within range of her marksmanship abilities. If the situation had been real rather than training, Sarah's reconnaissance report exceeded Morrison's expectations in both quality and tactical insight. She identified 3 separate firing positions that opposing forces were using to control the terrain, calculated the most effective approach routes for friendly forces, and provided detailed recommendations for coordinating indirect fire with ground assault. But Morrison noted that Sarah's report also included information that could only have been obtained by someone with exceptional observation skills and tactical understanding of how opposing forces would likely respond to different types of attacks. The real test came when Morrison asked Sarah to demonstrate her recommended approach by actually conducting the reconnaissance mission under observation from both friendly and opposing forces. The scenario required Sarah to move through contested terrain, identify targets, and report back without being detected by opposing forces who were actively searching for reconnaissance elements. Success required not just marksmanship skills, but the complete range of tactical abilities that distinguished expert snipers from competent marksmen. Sarah's performance during the reconnaissance mission established her reputation among the Special Forces community at Fort Bragg. She successfully infiltrated to within 200 meters of the opposing position, identified targets that other reconnaissance elements had missed, and exfiltrated without detection despite the opposing forces' concentrated efforts to locate her. More impressively, her movement techniques and camouflage discipline demonstrated professional-level skills that typically required years of specialized training to develop. Morrison's after-action report documented Sarah's performance in language that would be distributed throughout the special operations community. Captain Mitchell demonstrates exceptional tactical abilities that exceed those of many personnel with specialized training in reconnaissance and long-range surveillance. Her movement techniques, observation skills, and terrain analysis capabilities suggest natural aptitude for assignments requiring individual initiative and technical expertise. The report also included a recommendation that would significantly impact Sarah's military career. Captain Mitchell's demonstrated abilities suggest she would be an excellent candidate for advanced sniper training and special operations assignments. Her combination of technical skills, tactical understanding, and professional maturity makes her particularly well suited for independent operations requiring individual initiative and superior marksmanship. But Morrison's recommendation also acknowledged the institutional realities that would likely prevent Sarah from receiving the assignments her abilities warranted. Current personnel policies and traditional attitudes about women in combat roles may limit opportunities for Captain Mitchell to serve in positions that fully utilize her exceptional capabilities. This represents a significant loss of talent. For units that require the highest levels of individual competence and tactical expertise, Sarah received copies of Morrison's evaluation through unofficial channels, and the assessment confirmed both her tactical abilities and the institutional barriers she would continue to face. Morrison's recommendation carried significant weight within the special operations community, but formal assignments were controlled by personnel officers who operated according to policies and traditions that didn't necessarily prioritize individual capabilities over organizational conventions. The next 6 months at Fort Bragg became a period of professional limbo that tested Sarah's patience and commitment to military service. Her performance in the joint exercise had established her reputation among tactical units, but that reputation didn't translate into assignment opportunities that matched her demonstrated abilities. Instead, Sarah found herself receiving increasingly complex intelligence assignments that utilized her analytical skills while completely ignoring her tactical expertise. Thompson's approach to Sarah's career development reflected his genuine desire to help her succeed within existing organizational structures. He recommended her for advanced intelligence courses, supported her applications for assignments with increased responsibility, and provided her with projects that would enhance her professional reputation within the intelligence community. But Thompson also made clear that pursuing combat assignments would likely damage her career prospects and limit her opportunities for advancement within the military hierarchy. The advice represented conventional wisdom about how military careers developed, but it ignored the fundamental mismatch between Sarah's exceptional abilities and the roles that conventional career paths would provide. Thompson's recommendation that Sarah focus on intelligence work was logical from an organizational perspective, but it essentially asked her to abandon the military specialties where her contributions could be most significant in favor of assignments that utilized only a fraction of her capabilities. Sarah's response revealed the strategic thinking that would characterize her approach to institutional challenges throughout her military career. Rather than directly challenging Thompson's guidance or demanding immediate changes to her assignment, Sarah began building relationships and establishing credentials that would position her for opportunities when they became available. She volunteered for additional training courses, sought out mentorship from officers who had experience with unconventional career paths, and maintained her marksmanship skills through competitive shooting programs that kept her at peak performance levels. The strategy required patience and political awareness that weren't taught in military training programs. But Sarah understood that institutional change often occurred through persistent demonstration of capability rather than direct confrontation with established policies. Her goal was to position herself so effectively that when opportunities arose, her qualifications would be undeniable and her selection would be based on merit rather than organizational convenience. The opportunity that would test Sarah's strategy came 18 months later, when intelligence reports indicated that American forces in eastern Syria were facing a new type of threat that required specialized capabilities to counter effectively. Enemy forces had begun employing highly trained snipers, who were systematically targeting American commanders and communications personnel, creating tactical problems that conventional countermeasures couldn't address. The threat required deployment of American sniper teams with capabilities that matched or exceeded those of the enemy specialists. The deployment request specifically asked for personnel with advanced marksmanship training, extensive tactical experience, and the kind of individual initiative that independent operations required. Sarah's unofficial reputation within the special operations community made her an obvious candidate for the assignment, but her official military occupational specialty and current assignment in intelligence work complicated her selection for a combat deployment that would utilize skills she had demonstrated but wasn't officially trained to employ. Colonel Morrison, who had observed Sarah's abilities during the joint exercise, submitted a formal request for her assignment to the Syria deployment. Morrison's justification focused on her demonstrated tactical capabilities and argued that her intelligence background would provide valuable additional expertise for operations that required both marksmanship excellence and analytical understanding of enemy tactics. The request represented exactly the kind of opportunity Sarah had been preparing for, but it also required approval from personnel officers who might prioritize policy compliance over operational effectiveness. The response to Morrison's request revealed the institutional tensions that surrounded assignments involving both combat roles and female personnel. Sarah's intelligence supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, opposed the deployment on grounds that losing her analytical capabilities would compromise the intelligence section's mission effectiveness. Hayes argued that Sarah's intelligence work was too valuable to interrupt for a temporary combat assignment, and that her skills were better utilized in her current role than in field operations where those same capabilities could be provided by personnel with formal sniper training. The disagreement between Morrison and Hayes represented competing philosophies about how military talent should be developed and utilized. Morrison's perspective emphasized matching individual capabilities with mission requirements, regardless of traditional role boundaries or organizational convenience. Hayes's approach prioritized organizational stability and policy compliance, arguing that military effectiveness depended on personnel serving in their assigned specialties rather than pursuing assignments that might compromise unit readiness in other areas. Sarah found herself at the center of a bureaucratic battle that would determine not only her immediate assignment but also establish precedents for how the military would handle similar situations involving exceptional personnel whose abilities transcended traditional role boundaries. The outcome would either validate her strategy of persistent preparation and professional excellence, or confirm that institutional barriers were too entrenched to overcome through individual achievement alone. The Pentagon's decision regarding Sarah's deployment to Syria arrived on a Tuesday morning that would fundamentally alter her relationship with military service. The official memorandum, signed by Brigadier General Robert Carlson from the Army Personnel Command, was diplomatically worded but unambiguous in its conclusions. Captain Mitchell's current assignment in intelligence operations provides critical capabilities that cannot be interrupted for temporary deployment to combat zones. Her analytical expertise and established operational knowledge make her indispensable to current mission requirements at Fort Bragg. The rejection represented more than a denied assignment. It symbolized the institutional unwillingness to utilize exceptional talent when that utilization challenged traditional organizational boundaries. Sarah had spent 3 years building credentials, establishing relationships, and demonstrating capabilities that exceeded standard requirements, only to discover that excellence within existing systems mattered less than compliance with established policies. The memorandum's language suggested that her intelligence work was too valuable to interrupt. But Sarah understood the underlying message. Women's roles in the military were defined by institutional comfort rather than operational necessity. Colonel Morrison's response to the Pentagon's decision revealed the frustration that competent leaders felt when bureaucratic considerations overrode tactical requirements. Morrison had requested Sarah's assignment based on specific operational needs and demonstrated capabilities, but personnel policies had prioritized organizational convenience over mission effectiveness. His frank conversation with Sarah about the decision's implications provided insights into how institutional barriers operated at levels that individual excellence couldn't overcome. Morrison explained that the Syria deployment would proceed with personnel whose official qualifications matched assignment requirements, even though their actual capabilities might be inferior to Sarah's demonstrated abilities. The military's risk-averse approach to personnel assignments meant that proven performance in unconventional roles carried less weight than formal training credentials and traditional career patterns. Morrison's assessment was blunt. The system was designed to minimize administrative challenges rather than maximize operational effectiveness, but Morrison also offered Sarah something more valuable than sympathy for institutional unfairness. He provided her with access to advanced training opportunities that would enhance her official qualifications while maintaining her tactical edge for future opportunities. Morrison arranged for Sarah to attend the Army's Advanced Marksmanship Unit at Fort Moore, a specialized program that would provide her with formal sniper credentials that couldn't be dismissed by personnel officers who prioritize documentation over demonstrated ability. The Advanced Marksmanship Unit represented the Army's primary training facility for precision shooting, where the military's most talented marksmen received instruction that surpassed anything available in standard training programs. The facility's instructors were Olympic-level competitors, former special operations personnel, and technical experts who understood ballistics, equipment optimization, and environmental factors at levels that bordered on scientific research. Admission to the program required exceptional qualifications and command endorsement, both of which Morrison's recommendation provided. Sarah's 6 weeks at the Advanced Marksmanship Unit became a transformative experience that elevated her abilities from exceptional to world-class. The program's curriculum covered advanced ballistics calculations, precision rifle construction, environmental impact assessment, and psychological preparation for high-stress shooting scenarios. But the training also provided Sarah with something equally important: exposure to institutional approaches that valued individual excellence over organizational conventions. The unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel David Pierce, was a former Delta Force operator who had accumulated more confirmed long-range eliminations than any active-duty soldier in American military history. Pierce's leadership philosophy emphasized individual capability and mission accomplishment over adherence to traditional hierarchies or policies that limited operational effectiveness. His approach to personnel evaluation focused entirely on performance, and his assessment of Sarah's abilities was unqualified in its enthusiasm. Pierce's evaluation of Sarah's training performance documented capabilities that exceeded those of personnel with years of specialized experience. Captain Mitchell demonstrates exceptional natural ability combined with professional dedication that produces performance levels rarely observed in military training environments. Her mathematical understanding of ballistics, equipment optimization skills, and psychological preparation exceeds standards typically achieved by personnel with extensive combat experience. But Pierce's evaluation also included recommendations that would significantly impact Sarah's future opportunities. Captain Mitchell's capabilities suggest she would be exceptionally effective in assignments requiring independent operation, complex target engagement, and individual initiative under extreme stress. Her combination of technical excellence and tactical maturity makes her ideally suited for specialized operations, where standard personnel might not possess adequate capabilities. The training program's final exercise tested students' abilities under conditions that simulated the stress and complexity of actual combat operations. Students were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances while operating under time pressure, environmental challenges, and simulated enemy fire. The exercise was designed to identify personnel whose capabilities would remain effective under the psychological and physical stress that real operations imposed. Sarah's performance during the final exercise established records that would remain unbroken for years afterward. She successfully engaged targets at distances exceeding 1,200 meters, while moving between firing positions under simulated enemy observation. Her accuracy under stress exceeded 95%, and her tactical movement between positions demonstrated fieldcraft that impressed instructors with decades of special operations experience. More significantly, her performance remained consistent throughout the exercise, indicating the kind of psychological resilience that distinguished exceptional performers from merely competent ones. Pierce's final assessment of Sarah's capabilities was unequivocal in its conclusions and recommendations. Captain Mitchell possesses world-class marksmanship abilities that exceed those of 99% of military personnel. Her tactical understanding, equipment expertise, and psychological preparation make her exceptionally qualified for assignments requiring individual initiative and superior technical skills. I recommend her for immediate assignment to special operations units where her capabilities can be fully utilized. But Pierce also acknowledged the institutional realities that would likely prevent Sarah from receiving assignments that matched her demonstrated abilities. Current organizational policies and traditional attitudes may limit opportunities for Captain Mitchell to serve in positions that fully utilize her exceptional capabilities. This represents a significant waste of talent that could provide decisive advantages in operations requiring superior individual performance. Sarah returned to Fort Bragg with formal credentials that documented her exceptional abilities, but she also carried Pierce's assessment of institutional limitations that would likely prevent those abilities from being utilized effectively. The Advanced Marksmanship Unit had provided her with technical knowledge and official recognition that couldn't be dismissed by personnel officers, but it hadn't changed the fundamental policies that channeled female personnel away from combat. Assignments. Her return to intelligence work felt like professional imprisonment disguised as career development. Sarah's daily routine involved analyzing threats that she was better qualified to neutralize than most of the personnel who would be assigned to eliminate them. She prepared briefings about sniper threats while knowing that her own capabilities exceeded those of the enemy personnel she was identifying. The disconnect between her qualifications and her assignments had become too obvious to ignore or rationalize through appeals to organizational necessity. Major Thompson's welcome back conversation revealed his awareness of Sarah's frustration and his genuine desire to help her find satisfaction within existing career frameworks. Thompson had monitored Sarah's performance at the Advanced Marksmanship Unit and understood that her capabilities now exceeded those required for intelligence work. His suggestion that Sarah consider transitioning to instructor positions at military training facilities represented his attempt to find assignments that would utilize her technical expertise while remaining within acceptable organizational boundaries. But Thompson's recommendation also revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of Sarah's motivation and career objectives. Sarah hadn't spent years developing world-class marksmanship abilities to become a training instructor who taught others. To perform missions she wasn't allowed to undertake herself. Her goal remained an operational assignment where her capabilities could contribute directly to mission success and the protection of American forces. Teaching others to do the job she wanted represented a compromise that Thompson viewed as reasonable. But Sarah found professionally unacceptable. Sarah's response to Thompson's career guidance was respectful but firm in its rejection of compromises that would waste her capabilities on assignments that served organizational convenience rather than operational necessity. She appreciated Thompson's concern for her career development, but she refused to accept that her exceptional abilities should be channeled into roles that minimize their impact rather than maximize their contribution to military effectiveness. The conversation revealed the fundamental tension between individual capability and institutional policy that would define Sarah's remaining time at Fort Bragg. Thompson represented the institutional perspective that valued stability, predictability, and policy compliance over individual excellence that challenged traditional organizational structures. Sarah represented the individual whose capabilities exceeded institutional frameworks and whose utilization required flexibility that risk-averse organizations typically avoided. The breaking point came 6 months later when intelligence reports indicated that American forces in eastern Syria were facing escalating casualties from enemy sniper attacks that conventional countermeasures couldn't address effectively. The enemy had deployed specialists whose capabilities exceeded those of standard insurgent forces, and American units were requesting urgent deployment of personnel with advanced marksmanship training to counter the threat. The deployment request specifically identified the need for personnel with capabilities that match those documented in Sarah's training records. Colonel Morrison's second request for Sarah's assignment to the Syria deployment was supported by detailed justification that addressed the personnel office's previous objections. Morrison argued that the current threat level required deployment of the Army's most capable personnel, regardless of their current assignments or traditional role. Boundaries. He provided tactical analysis demonstrating that Sarah's capabilities were specifically suited to counter the threats that American forces were facing, and that her deployment could prevent casualties that less qualified personnel might not be able to prevent. The request also included support from Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, whose assessment of Sarah's abilities carried weight within the special operations community. Pierce's recommendation emphasized that denying Sarah's deployment would waste capabilities that could provide decisive advantages in operations where individual excellence might determine mission success or failure. The combined recommendations from two respected commanders represented the strongest possible endorsement for Sarah's deployment, but the Pentagon's response to the second deployment request revealed institutional priorities that had little relationship to operational effectiveness or individual capability. The Personnel Office's rejection was based on policy considerations that prioritized organizational stability over tactical requirements. Captain Mitchell's current assignment provides essential intelligence capabilities that cannot be interrupted. For combat deployments, alternative personnel with appropriate qualifications are available for the Syria assignment. The reference to alternative personnel with appropriate qualifications was particularly galling because Sarah's documented capabilities exceeded those of any alternative candidates. The Personnel Office was essentially arguing that formal job classifications mattered more than actual performance, and that mediocre personnel in appropriate positions were preferable to exceptional personnel whose assignments challenged organizational conventions. Sarah's reading of the rejection memorandum marked the moment when her relationship with military service fundamentally changed. She had spent 4 years demonstrating exceptional capabilities, building professional relationships, and pursuing every avenue for utilizing her abilities within existing organizational structures. The consistent pattern of institutional resistance to her deployment had nothing to do with her qualifications or performance, and everything to do with policies that prioritized administrative convenience over operational effectiveness. That evening, Sarah called her father in Nebraska for the first time in 6 months. Thomas Mitchell had supported his daughter's military career through encouragement and pride, but he had also observed the frustration that institutional barriers had created despite her professional success. Their conversation that night revealed Sarah's growing disillusionment with an organization that claimed to value excellence, while consistently refusing to utilize the exceptional capabilities she had spent years developing. Thomas Mitchell's response reflected the practical wisdom of someone who had served in an earlier era when institutional policies were different, but institutional resistance to change was equally persistent. He reminded Sarah that military service was ultimately about protecting American lives and interests, not about personal career satisfaction or organizational recognition. If the military wouldn't utilize her capabilities effectively, perhaps she should consider alternative ways to serve her country, where her abilities would be valued rather than wasted. The suggestion opened possibilities that Sarah had been reluctant to consider during her years of trying to succeed within military frameworks. Private security companies, federal law enforcement agencies, and specialized consulting organizations all offered opportunities for personnel with her qualifications to contribute to national security objectives without the institutional barriers that military service imposed. The question was whether Sarah was prepared to abandon her military career in favor of alternatives that might utilize her capabilities more effectively. Her decision would come sooner than she anticipated, triggered by events that would test her abilities under circumstances that the military's personnel policies had never envisioned. The emergency briefing at Fort Bragg began at 03:00 hours on a September morning that would forever change how the American military understood the cost of institutional inflexibility. Sarah entered the secure conference room, expecting routine intelligence updates about regional threats. But the satellite imagery displayed on the briefing room's main screen revealed a tactical nightmare that would test every assumption about combat readiness and personnel deployment policies. Major General William Barnes, commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division, stood before an audience of senior staff officers whose expressions reflected the gravity of information they were about to receive. Barnes was a combat veteran whose 3 decades of military service had included command positions in every major conflict since the Gulf War, and whose tactical judgment was respected throughout the Army's leadership structure. His decision to conduct this briefing personally indicated the strategic importance of the situation developing in eastern Oregon. The crisis had begun 12 hours earlier when a routine training exercise involving the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, had encountered unexpected contact with a heavily armed militia group that had established positions throughout the Cascade Mountain wilderness. What military planners had designed as a standard terrain exercise had evolved into a complex tactical situation involving 800 American soldiers trapped in mountainous terrain by enemy forces whose capabilities and intentions remained unclear. Barnes's briefing revealed the scope and complexity of challenges that conventional military doctrine hadn't anticipated. The militia group, calling itself the Western Liberation Army, had spent months preparing defensive positions throughout a 50-square-mile area of national forest land. Their positions were expertly camouflaged, mutually supporting, and equipped with military-grade weapons that suggested coordination with foreign suppliers or stolen military equipment. More troubling, intercepted communications indicated that the militia possessed detailed intelligence about American training schedules and tactical procedures. The Western Liberation Army was led by Marcus Webb, a former Army Special Forces colonel who had been dishonorably discharged 3 years earlier for attempting to sell classified information to foreign intelligence services. Webb possessed intimate knowledge of American tactical doctrine, training, procedures, and equipment capabilities that made him exceptionally dangerous as an adversary. His leadership had transformed what might have been a disorganized extremist group into a disciplined, paramilitary force capable of conducting sophisticated operations against regular military units. Intelligence analysis indicated that Webb had recruited approximately 200 followers, many of whom possessed military training and combat experience from recent overseas deployments. The group had established a network of fortified positions throughout the mountain wilderness, creating interlocking fields of fire that could dominate the valleys and ridgelines that American forces would need to traverse for extraction or reinforcement. Most concerning, the militia had demonstrated sniper capabilities that had already resulted in 12 American casualties during the initial contact. Barnes's tactical assessment revealed the limited options available for resolving the crisis. Through conventional military responses, the terrain heavily favored defensive operations, making direct assault prohibitively costly in terms of American casualties. Air support was limited by weather conditions and the mountainous environment that provided excellent concealment for anti-aircraft weapons. Artillery bombardment was complicated by the proximity of civilian communities and the dispersed nature of enemy positions throughout protected wilderness areas. The situation was further complicated by political considerations that limited military response options. The Western Liberation Army had positioned their operations within areas that contained civilian infrastructure, environmental protection zones, and Native American tribal lands that required federal coordination before military operations could be authorized. Any large-scale military response would require approval from multiple federal agencies, and potentially trigger legal challenges that could delay effective action for weeks or months. Sarah's role in the briefing was initially limited to providing intelligence analysis about enemy capabilities and potential tactical responses. Her assessment of the militia's defensive positions revealed sophisticated understanding of military tactics that confirmed Webb's involvement in planning their operations. The sniper positions were particularly well designed, providing overlapping coverage of key terrain, while offering concealment and escape routes that would make them difficult to neutralize through conventional counter-sniper tactics. But Sarah's analysis also identified tactical opportunities that conventional intelligence assessment had overlooked. Her understanding of advanced marksmanship and fieldcraft enabled her to recognize vulnerability in the enemy's defensive scheme that could be exploited by personnel with exceptional long-range capabilities. The militia's positions were mutually supporting against conventional attack, but they contained gaps that could be penetrated by individual operators with superior technical skills and tactical understanding. Major General Barnes's response to Sarah's tactical analysis revealed both his recognition of her exceptional capabilities and his awareness of institutional policies that prevented her deployment in combat roles. Barnes acknowledged that Sarah's assessment identified opportunities that other analysts had missed, but he also noted that utilizing those opportunities would require personnel with capabilities that matched her demonstrated abilities. The implication was clear. Sarah had identified solutions that she was uniquely qualified to implement, but military policy prevented her from being assigned to implement them. The briefing concluded with Barnes's announcement that the Pentagon had authorized deployment of Special Operations Forces to resolve the crisis, but that deployment would require 48 hours for personnel and equipment to reach the operational area. During that interval, the trapped Rangers would have to maintain their positions while avoiding casualties from enemy sniper fire that had already proven lethal. The timeline created tactical problems that conventional solutions couldn't address. Effectively, Sarah remained in the briefing room as other staff officers departed, studying the satellite imagery and tactical maps that revealed the full complexity of the situation. Her analysis of enemy positions and American force deployment suggested tactical options that hadn't been discussed during the official briefing, approaches that could potentially resolve the crisis more quickly and with fewer casualties than the conventional response that Barnes had authorized. Colonel Morrison, who had observed Sarah's reaction to the briefing, approached her with the directness that characterized his leadership style. Morrison understood that Sarah's capabilities were specifically suited to the tactical challenges that the Oregon crisis presented, and that institutional policies were preventing utilization of resources that could save American lives. His conversation with Sarah would determine whether exceptional individual capability could overcome institutional barriers when operational necessity demanded immediate action. Morrison's assessment was blunt and professionally risky. The Rangers trapped in Oregon faced a tactical situation that could result in significant casualties before special operations reinforcement arrived. Enemy sniper positions were systematically targeting American personnel, and conventional countermeasures weren't providing adequate protection. The crisis required immediate deployment of personnel with advanced marksmanship capabilities, regardless of their official assignments or organizational policies that might complicate such deployment. Sarah's response revealed her understanding of both the tactical opportunities and the career consequences that pursuing those opportunities would involve. She could identify approaches to neutralizing enemy sniper positions that would provide immediate relief for trapped American forces, but implementing those approaches would require her to abandon her intelligence assignment and deploy to combat operations without authorization from personnel offices that had consistently refused such assignments. Morrison's proposal was unprecedented in its disregard for established policies and potentially career-ending in its implications for both officers involved. He suggested that Sarah accompany him to Oregon as an intelligence liaison whose tactical expertise would support special operations planning, but whose actual role would involve direct action against enemy positions if operational circumstances required such action. The assignment would be officially documented as intelligence support, but would actually utilize Sarah's marksmanship capabilities in ways that military policy didn't explicitly authorize. The proposal represented everything Sarah had sought during her military career, an opportunity to utilize her exceptional abilities in operations where those abilities could make decisive differences in protecting American lives. But it also represented a direct challenge to institutional policies that Morrison and Sarah had spent years trying to work within. Success would validate their approach to matching individual capabilities with operational requirements. Failure would likely end both of their military careers, while potentially compromising the mission they were attempting to support. Sarah's decision required weighing professional consequences against operational necessity, individual career prospects, against the lives of 800 American soldiers who were trapped by enemy forces in mountainous terrain. The intelligence reports indicated that enemy sniper fire was systematically degrading American defensive capabilities, and that conventional countermeasures weren't providing adequate protection. The tactical situation demanded immediate deployment of personnel with capabilities that could neutralize threats before additional casualties occurred. Her acceptance of Morrison's proposal was immediate and professionally decisive. Sarah understood that institutional approval for her deployment would never come through official channels, and that waiting for proper authorization would likely result in American casualties that her intervention could prevent. The decision represented a fundamental choice between institutional compliance and operational effectiveness, between following policies that wasted her capabilities and accepting risks that would allow those capabilities to serve their intended purpose. Morrison's arrangements for Sarah's deployment to Oregon bypassed normal personnel procedures through creative interpretation of existing authorities and tactical necessity. Sarah's assignment was officially documented as intelligence liaison supporting special operations planning, but Morrison ensured that she would have access to equipment and positioning that would enable direct action if circumstances required such intervention. The deployment would place Sarah in position to utilize her capabilities while maintaining official cover that could protect both officers from immediate disciplinary action. The flight to Oregon provided Sarah with detailed briefings about enemy positions, American force deployment, and tactical challenges that special operations forces would face upon their arrival. But Sarah's analysis of the situation revealed opportunities for immediate action that could provide relief for trapped Rangers without waiting for reinforcement that might arrive too late to prevent additional casualties. Her marksmanship capabilities and tactical understanding suggested approaches that could neutralize key enemy positions before organized rescue operations began. The helicopter landing at the forward operating base, established by Army aviation units supporting the trapped Rangers, introduced Sarah to tactical realities that intelligence briefings couldn't fully convey. The mountainous terrain provided excellent concealment for enemy positions while limiting mobility for American forces attempting to establish secure perimeters. Enemy sniper fire was effectively controlling key terrain features that Rangers needed for defensive positions, supply routes, and potential extraction zones that Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed, commanding officer of the Helicopter Support Unit, briefed Sarah and Morrison about tactical developments that had occurred since their departure from Fort Bragg. Enemy sniper activity had intensified during the previous 6 hours, resulting in 4 additional American casualties and forcing Rangers to abandon positions that were essential for maintaining defensive cohesion. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional countermeasures weren't providing adequate protection against threats that required specialized capabilities to neutralize effectively. Reed's assessment of American capabilities revealed limitations that conventional military doctrine hadn't adequately addressed. The Rangers possessed standard infantry training and equipment that were appropriate for most tactical situations, but the current crisis required specialized skills that most personnel didn't possess. Enemy sniper positions were located at distances that exceeded effective range for standard military rifles, and camouflage techniques were defeating detection capabilities that conventional reconnaissance provided. Sarah's response to Reed's briefing demonstrated her understanding of tactical solutions that her capabilities could provide. She identified enemy positions that could be engaged from concealed locations that American forces hadn't previously considered. Approaches that would utilize terrain features to provide firing positions while maintaining concealment from enemy observation. Her analysis suggested tactical options that could neutralize key threats immediately rather than waiting for reinforcement that might not arrive in time to prevent additional casualties. Reed's authorization for Sarah's reconnaissance mission was based on operational necessity rather than strict adherence to personnel policies that might complicate effective response to the developing crisis. Sarah's official assignment as intelligence liaison provided cover for activities that would actually involve direct observation of enemy positions from locations that placed her within effective engagement range of targets that were threatening American forces. The mission would position Sarah to provide intelligence support while maintaining capability for direct action if tactical circumstances required immediate intervention. As Sarah prepared her equipment for the reconnaissance mission that would determine whether institutional barriers or operational effectiveness would prevail in the Oregon mountains, she understood that her next actions would either validate years of professional preparation or end her military career in failure that could compromise the lives of soldiers she had sworn to protect. The pre-dawn darkness of the Oregon mountains provided perfect concealment as Sarah established her observation post on a rocky outcropping 2,000 feet above the valley where 800 American Rangers remained trapped by the Western Liberation Army's carefully orchestrated ambush. Her position, selected after 3 hours of careful movement through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers, offered unobstructed views of enemy sniper positions while providing the camouflage and firing stability that precision engagement required. Through her advanced optics, Sarah could observe the systematic precision with which Marcus Webb's militia had transformed the mountain wilderness into a killing zone designed to eliminate American forces through attrition rather than direct assault. Enemy positions were expertly concealed among natural rock formations, utilizing terrain features that provided protection from conventional military responses, while offering clear fields of fire toward valleys where American forces were concentrated. The tactical sophistication exceeded anything that domestic militia groups typically achieved, confirming intelligence assessments about Webb's professional military background and foreign support. Sarah's reconnaissance during the previous 6 hours had identified 12 primary sniper positions that were controlling key terrain features essential for American defensive operations. Each position was manned by personnel with demonstrated marksmanship capabilities, equipped with precision rifles that enabled effective engagement at distances exceeding 800 meters. More concerning, the positions were coordinated through communications that allowed concentrated fire on specific targets while maintaining dispersion that defeated conventional counter-sniper tactics, the enemy's systematic approach to eliminating. American leadership had already claimed 3 Rangers officers and 2 senior non-commissioned officers whose deaths had disrupted unit cohesion and command effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel James Carter, commanding officer of the trapped Rangers, had been wounded during the initial contact and was operating from a concealed command post that limited his ability to coordinate defensive operations without effective leadership and communication. The Rangers were gradually losing tactical initiative to enemy forces whose patience and preparation provided decisive advantages. Sarah's radio. Contact with Morrison revealed the deteriorating tactical situation and the limited time available for intervention before American casualties became unsustainable. Special Operations Reinforcement remained 18 hours away due to weather conditions that prevented helicopter insertion and terrain that made ground approach extremely difficult. Artillery support was unavailable due to the proximity of civilian communities and environmental restrictions that prevented bombardment of protected wilderness areas. The Rangers were essentially on their own until weather cleared enough to permit evacuation or reinforcement. Morrison's assessment was grimly realistic about options available through conventional military responses. The enemy positions were too well concealed and protected for infantry assault to succeed without prohibitive casualties. Air support was negated by weather and terrain that provided natural camouflage against thermal detection. Indirect fire was complicated by environmental regulations and the dispersed nature of targets that required precise engagement rather than area bombardment. The tactical situation required individual initiative and specialized capabilities that standard military training didn't provide. Sarah's response revealed her understanding of tactical opportunities that her unique capabilities could exploit. She had identified 17 specific enemy positions that could be engaged from her current location, including all 12 primary sniper positions that were controlling critical terrain. Environmental conditions were optimal for precision shooting, with minimal wind and excellent visibility that would enable accurate engagement at distances exceeding 1,200 meters. Her equipment and ammunition were adequate for sustained operations that could neutralize multiple targets while maintaining concealment from enemy counter-reconnaissance, but engaging enemy positions would violate every regulation regarding unauthorized combat operations, rules of engagement, and civilian oversight of military activities in domestic territory. Sarah's official assignment as intelligence liaison provided no authority for direct action against American citizens, regardless of their hostile activities against military personnel. Her intervention would represent exactly the kind of individual initiative that military discipline was designed to prevent, potentially triggering legal consequences that could extend far beyond her own career. Morrison's authorization for Sarah's intervention was carefully worded to provide legal protection while enabling the direct action that tactical necessity demanded. He designated the malicious sniper attacks as immediate threats to American forces that required defensive response. Under provisions of military law that authorized protection of personnel under fire, Sarah's engagement of enemy positions would be documented as defensive action rather than offensive operations, providing legal cover for activities that exceeded her official authority but served legitimate military objectives. The authorization represented Morrison's willingness to accept career-ending consequences for decisions that prioritized American lives over institutional policies. His radio transmission to Sarah was monitored by multiple command authorities, creating a permanent record of his approval for activities that violated established procedures. But Morrison understood that 800 American soldiers faced systematic elimination by enemy forces, and that conventional responses weren't adequate to prevent casualties that immediate action could eliminate. Sarah's first shot eliminated the enemy sniper who had been targeting the Rangers' main command post from a concealed position 1,347 meters from her location. The .338 Lapua Magnum round crossed the intervening distance in 3.2 seconds, striking the target center mass and immediately removing the threat that had prevented American commanders from effectively coordinating defensive operations. The engagement demonstrated both Sarah's exceptional marksmanship abilities and her tactical understanding of priority targets whose elimination would provide maximum benefit for friendly forces. The militia's response to Sarah's initial engagement revealed their professional training and disciplined approach to tactical operations. Rather than panicking or abandoning positions, enemy snipers immediately began searching for the American position that had eliminated their colleague. Their systematic approach to counter-reconnaissance indicated military training and experience that confirmed intelligence assessments about Webb's recruitment of veterans with combat experience from recent overseas deployments. Sarah's second engagement eliminated the enemy observer who had been directing fire toward Rangers attempting to establish supply routes through terrain that required exposure to sniper attack. The target was partially concealed behind rock formations at 1,156 meters, requiring Sarah to calculate bullet trajectory that would penetrate concealment while accounting for environmental factors that could affect accuracy. Her shot struck the target precisely, immediately reducing pressure on American forces attempting to maintain logistical support for their defensive positions. The tactical impact of Sarah's interventions became apparent within minutes of her second engagement. Rangers who had been pinned down by sniper fire began moving to positions that provided better defensive coverage and communication capabilities. Medical personnel gained access to wounded soldiers who had been isolated by enemy fire and supply. Operations resumed through routes that had been controlled by eliminated enemy positions. Sarah's precision elimination of key threats was enabling conventional military responses that had been previously impossible. But Sarah's activities also attracted concentrated attention from remaining enemy forces who recognized that their tactical advantages were being systematically eliminated by someone with exceptional capabilities. Webb's communications, intercepted by American intelligence assets, revealed his understanding that a military sniper with advanced training was operating against his positions. His response was to concentrate remaining snipers in coordinated hunts designed to locate and eliminate the American position that was threatening his entire operation. Sarah's third engagement occurred as enemy forces were repositioning to search for her location. Her target was an enemy sniper moving between concealed positions at 943 meters, presenting a brief opportunity for engagement during his movement across open terrain. Sarah's shot eliminated the target during a 3-second window when he was exposed, demonstrating the kind of tactical patience and timing that distinguished expert snipers from competent marksmen. The elimination of 3 enemy snipers within 15 minutes created tactical confusion among remaining militia forces, who realized they were facing capabilities that exceeded their previous experience. Webb's radio communications revealed frustration and concern about American assets that hadn't been anticipated in his operational planning. His orders for coordinated counter-sniper operations indicated recognition that his force's tactical advantages were being neutralized by individual initiative that conventional military doctrine didn't typically employ. Sarah's fourth and fifth engagements occurred simultaneously, as she engaged 2 enemy snipers who had established mutual observation positions designed to provide overlapping coverage while protecting each other from counter-sniper attack. The engagement required rapid transition between targets at different ranges with precision that prevented either target from identifying her position before being eliminated. Sarah's successful engagement of both targets within 8 seconds demonstrated advanced tactical skills that even specialized military training rarely produced. The cumulative effect of Sarah's interventions transformed the tactical situation from systematic American defeat to achievable defensive success. Rangers began advancing to positions that had been previously controlled by enemy fire, re-establishing communication networks that enabled coordinated operations. Medical evacuation of wounded personnel became possible through routes that were no longer dominated by enemy snipers. Most significantly, American forces regained tactical initiative that enabled them to plan extraction operations rather than simply surviving enemy attacks. But Sarah's success also escalated the crisis beyond purely military considerations. Her elimination of American citizens engaged in armed resistance to federal Authority created legal and political complications that extended far beyond tactical effectiveness. Military engagement of domestic militia groups required coordination with federal law enforcement agencies and civilian authorities whose involvement could compromise operational security and effectiveness. Sarah's direct action had achieved tactical objectives, while potentially triggering legal consequences that could affect everyone involved in authorizing her intervention. Morrison's radio communications with higher headquarters revealed the institutional tensions that Sarah's success had created. His tactical reports documented her effectiveness in neutralizing threats and enabling American force extraction, but those same reports created permanent records of activities that exceeded authorized military operations in domestic territory. Morrison was simultaneously reporting operational success and documenting actions that could result in courts-martial for everyone involved in approving unauthorized combat operations. Sarah's continuation of engagement operations reflected her understanding that tactical success required complete elimination of threats rather than partial neutralization that could allow enemy recovery and renewed attacks. Her sixth engagement eliminated an enemy communications specialist whose equipment was coordinating militia operations throughout the valley. The target was located in a heavily concealed position at 1,423 meters that required calculation of complex environmental factors and precise shot placement to penetrate protective cover. The elimination of enemy communications capabilities created immediate tactical advantages that enabled American forces to begin extraction operations while enemy forces lost coordination that had made their defensive positions mutually supporting. Rangers began moving toward evacuation zones through routes that were no longer controlled by organized enemy fire, and helicopter extraction became feasible as landing zones were secured through elimination of threats that had previously made aviation support impossible. Sarah's 7th and 8th engagements eliminated enemy snipers who were attempting to re-establish control over extraction routes that American forces needed for evacuation operations. Both targets were engaged at ranges exceeding 1,100 meters while they were moving between positions, requiring Sarah to predict their movement and engage them during brief windows when they were exposed to accurate fire. Her successful elimination of both threats cleared the final obstacles preventing American extraction from terrain that had been controlled by enemy forces. The tactical transformation was dramatic and decisive. Within 2 hours of Sarah's initial engagement, American forces had transitioned from defensive positions under siege to coordinated extraction operations that would remove all personnel from enemy-controlled territory. Medical evacuation helicopters gained access to wounded Rangers who had been isolated by enemy fire, and supply aircraft provided ammunition and equipment that enabled sustained operations until extraction was complete. But even as tactical success became apparent, Sarah understood that her interventions had created institutional crises that would determine whether exceptional individual capability would be recognized and rewarded, or whether unauthorized initiative would be punished regardless of its effectiveness in protecting American lives. Her radio remained silent regarding official recognition of her contributions, while Morrison's communications with higher headquarters suggested that her actions were being evaluated through legal and political frameworks rather than purely military considerations. As Sarah prepared for her final engagements against remaining enemy positions that threatened American extraction operations, she realized that her career and potentially her freedom depended on whether institutional authorities would prioritize the lives she had saved over the regulations she had violated in saving them. The extraction helicopters lifted off from the Oregon mountains carrying 800 Rangers whose lives had been saved by Sarah's unauthorized intervention. But the celebration of tactical victory was overshadowed by institutional reckoning that began before the aircraft reached safe airspace. Within hours of the successful evacuation, Sarah found herself confined to quarters at Fort Bragg, while military investigators, federal prosecutors, and congressional oversight committees launched parallel inquiries into actions that had simultaneously saved American lives and violated fundamental principles of military authority and civilian control. The charges against Sarah were comprehensive and potentially career-ending, reflecting institutional priorities that valued regulatory compliance over operational effectiveness. Colonel Patricia Hayes, now serving as the investigating officer, had constructed a legal framework that treated Sarah's life-saving interventions as criminal violations of military discipline, federal law, and constitutional principles governing military operations in domestic territory. Hayes's approach transformed tactical success into legal liability, arguing that unauthorized individual initiative represented threats to democratic governance that exceeded any benefits that such initiative might provide. Sarah's account of her tactical calculations and engagement procedures demonstrated professional competence that exceeded standard military training and suggested capabilities that few personnel possessed. Her detailed explanation of environmental factors, ballistic calculations, and target prioritization revealed expertise that justified Morrison's assessment of her exceptional qualifications. The testimony established that her interventions represented appropriate utilization of specialized capabilities rather than assumption of responsibilities that exceeded her training or authority. But Sarah's testimony also acknowledged that her actions had violated established procedures and created legal precedents that could complicate future military operations. Her frank admission of regulatory violations demonstrated professional integrity, while raising questions about institutional policies that prevented effective utilization of exceptional capabilities when those capabilities could provide decisive tactical advantages. The court-martial's verdict reflected institutional tensions between individual excellence and organizational discipline that Sarah's case had exposed throughout military command structures. The panel's decision to acquit Sarah of unauthorized combat operations while finding her guilty of procedural violations represented a compromise that acknowledged both her tactical effectiveness and legitimate concerns about military discipline and civilian oversight. Sarah's sentence included reduction in rank and official reprimand, but avoided dismissal from military service or criminal penalties that could have ended her career and personal freedom. The panel's decision reflected recognition that her interventions had saved American lives while acknowledging that military discipline required consequences for violations of established procedures, regardless of tactical justification or operational effectiveness. But the court-martial's aftermath revealed institutional changes that Sarah's case had triggered throughout military leadership and policy-making structures. Pentagon officials announced a review of personnel policies governing deployment of specialized capabilities, and military training programs began incorporating instruction about individual initiative and tactical decision-making under extreme circumstances. Sarah's case had forced institutional recognition that exceptional capabilities required flexible policies that could utilize those capabilities effectively while maintaining appropriate oversight and accountability. The Rangers, whose lives Sarah had saved, organized unofficial recognition ceremonies that honored her contributions while avoiding official endorsement that might complicate her legal situation. Their testimonials provided powerful evidence of tactical effectiveness and moral courage that institutional policies had failed to recognize or reward appropriately. The soldiers' gratitude represented validation that transcended official recognition and established Sarah's reputation within military communities that valued operational effectiveness over administrative compliance. Sarah's reassignment to the Army's Marksmanship Training Unit represented an institutional compromise that acknowledged her exceptional capabilities, while providing assignment that utilized those capabilities within established organizational frameworks. The position enabled her to contribute to military effectiveness through training and instruction, rather than direct operational deployment, satisfying institutional requirements while recognizing her professional competence and tactical expertise. As POT, Sarah prepared for her new assignment. She understood that her case had established precedents for individual initiative and institutional flexibility that could benefit future military personnel whose capabilities exceeded standard organizational frameworks. Her willingness to accept legal risks for tactical effectiveness had forced military institutions to recognize tensions between regulatory compliance and operational necessity that affected decisions throughout command structures. The Oregon operation had demonstrated that exceptional individual capability, properly utilized, could achieve tactical objectives that conventional institutional responses couldn't accomplish within required timeframes. Sarah's interventions had saved 800 American lives while exposing institutional barriers that prevented effective utilization of military assets when those assets could provide decisive advantages in protecting American forces. But Sarah also understood that institutional change required persistent effort and strategic patience rather than dramatic individual gestures that challenged established policies directly. Her future contributions to military effectiveness would depend on her ability to work within evolving institutional frameworks while maintaining capabilities that could serve national security objectives when circumstances required exceptional individual performance. 5 years after the Oregon Mountains crisis, Sarah Mitchell stood before the Army War College as the newly appointed Director of Advanced Combat Training. Her promotion to full colonel came with an assignment to develop programs preparing exceptional personnel for situations where individual initiative could determine mission success. The institutional transformation following Sarah's case was profound. Pentagon leadership eventually recognized that rigid adherence to outdated policies had nearly cost 800 American lives. Defense Secretary Elizabeth Warren announced comprehensive reforms, eliminating barriers that prevented effective utilization of exceptional capabilities regardless of gender. Sarah's training programs incorporated lessons from the Oregon operation, teaching future commanders when conventional doctrine required adaptation. Her curriculum emphasized decision-making under extreme pressure, preparing military leaders to make difficult choices when institutional approval wasn't available. The 800 Rangers whose lives Sarah saved became living testimony to individual initiative's effectiveness. Many achieved senior leadership positions, carrying forward understanding that operational effectiveness sometimes required transcending established procedures. Marcus Webb received life imprisonment for terrorism. His confession revealed foreign funding that confirmed Sarah's assessment had prevented larger national security threats. Intelligence from Webb's network led to terrorist arrests across multiple states. Congressional hearings eventually praised institutional reforms Sarah's case prompted. Senator McCain's committee concluded that exceptional circumstances required exceptional responses, and military effectiveness depended on leaders recognizing when standard procedures were inadequate. America's military emerged stronger because one soldier refused accepting that institutional convenience mattered more than saving lives, proving exceptional individuals could transform entire systems through courage and conviction. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.